started, and if you see anybody, let them in, please.
Yep.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I would normally ask, well, my name's Arnold Taylor. I'm the program chair for the Kenton County Historical Society. Normally, we would have the president of the society, Bob Webster, or the vice president, Carl Lietzenmeyer, say a few words about whatever they wanted to say. And one of them would be, I'm sure, to ask you to check out our website to see how you can join if you're not already a member. And we have several levels of membership, all of which is explained on the website. So if you're not already a member and you're interested, do that, please. We also have a list of publications that are for sale, ranging from back issues of the Northern Kentucky Heritage Magazine to the bulletins that come out quarterly, and other books that have been published by various people, and we encourage you to take a look at that. You're in for a treat today, because if you did attend the presentation by Travis about locks and dams that the Behringer Crawford did a few weeks ago, you're coming back because you probably know that watching the video that he has alone is worth spending the time on listening to the program again. But it's an excellent program that certainly serves us all well to hear for a second time. I'm looking forward particularly to that that video. So let me introduce Travis Brown, our speaker today. Travis is a deputy with the Boone County Sheriff's Office. He's currently serving as the school resource officer at Ackerman Elementary School in Florence. He retired from the Fort Mitchell Police Department in 2014 after serving with the Kentucky State Police and Fort Wright Police. He completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Louisville, earning a Bachelor's of Arts degree in police administration. In 2015, he earned a Master's of Public Administration degree at Northern Kentucky University. Also in 2015, he became an adjunct professor at Xavier University's School of Criminal Justice. Involved in preserving local history, he currently serves as a board member of the Kenton County Historical Society. So Travis, welcome, and take it away.
Good morning, everybody. How are we today? Everybody hear me okay?
Can hear you real good.
Okay, good. I've got a PowerPoint and a video here to show you. And what we'll be talking about today is the history of travel and flow management of the Ohio River between Pittsburgh and Cairo, Illinois, between the years of 1800 and 2018. So I'll get this started here in just 1 second.
Let me also mention before Travis starts that if you have any questions, go into the chat feature, please, and enter your question, and then we'll deal with those at the end of the program. Sorry, Travis.
Oh, that's good, because I needed just a second anyway. Share sound and okay. Everybody see it?
Yes.
All right, good. We'll get started. Okay. Between 1790 and 1800, people started coming to Kentucky in more numbers. And the two ways you could get here is over land and by water. And the easiest way to get over the Appalachians was a thing called the Cumberland Gap. And I believe I've read that was actually, could have been a meteor strike at some time to create that gap. So wagons and foot travel eventually was able to pass through that, and that went into the middle and southern sections of Kentucky. But in our area, the Ohio River was the way folks got here, and you could walk the riverbank, or you could come down the river in one of these two boats over here. On the right, you'll see a flatboat, and that was the one that would only go one direction. It would come down the river, but you couldn't take it back again. So if you were a farmer, you wanted to take your crops to market, you could load up your flatboat and you could get it to the markets in St. Louis or New Orleans, but you couldn't go home again unless you did it on foot. And one of the problems with the river is you couldn't depend on its water flow. So you see on the left, that's August of 1883, and the river actually fell to 18 inches. You could actually walk across it, and that's a picture of Cincinnati and Covington. So you couldn't float your boat down the river in the summertime a lot of times if the water level fell that low. And of course, in 37, well, the water got up to 79.9 feet in Covington. And you can see that your barge traffic and steamboat traffic could not get through there. The bridges would obstruct. So the two main boats used in around 1800, there was a keel boat. And that keel boat had a thing on the back of it called a keel. If you look at the boat on the right, and it had a different shaped hull. And you could actually bring this one home again. And the way they did it, you can see it there, the guys on the side of the boat with the long poles would actually stick those poles in the bottom of the river. And, by manpower would actually push it. And this is how Lewis and Clark actually made it all the way to the forks of the Missouri. They had a boat similar to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the boat on the left is a flat boat, and that's a one-way. You could steer it, but you couldn't bring it home again. The guy who designed this flatboat, his name was Jacob Yoder. He's a Pennsylvania farmer, and he wanted to get his crops to market. So he designed this boat, loaded it up, and actually successfully floated from Pennsylvania to New Orleans in 1792. But he had to walk home. Like I said, Lewis and Clark actually started in Pittsburgh. And Meriwether Lewis actually ordered up one of these boats from a boat maker in Pittsburgh. And he did that in the spring of 1803, but when he got to Pittsburgh, the boat wasn't finished. And by the time the boat was nearing completion, the river ran very low, and he was unable to start his journey right away. He had to wait for some water to come down river, and even then, it took him from July 15th till August 31st to actually get to Cincinnati, where they had to take a break. They were worn out. And when they got to Louisville, this is what awaited them there. This is the Falls of the Ohio. And it's still there, but we'll find out here soon that they dug a channel around the falls to allow for boat passage. So Meriwether Lewis met up with Clark in Indiana at the Falls of the Ohio, and they hired a navigator to get them through the falls here. And at Louisville, the river will drop 8 feet in 2 miles, and that's pretty treacherous. So the traffic from the east now could go by road all the way to Wheeling, West Virginia, which at the time was Virginia. And Pittsburgh considered themselves to be the main hub on the Ohio at that time, but the national road didn't reach Pittsburgh. It went further south. And this is because the river was more navigable south of Pittsburgh. But the folks in Pittsburgh thought they could get more business if they deepened the channel and improved the navigation between Wheeling and Pittsburgh. So private businesses and other folks got together and funded a program that would improve the navigational channel. William Wilkins, he was a local businessman in Pittsburgh, and he actually got elected as a U.S. congressman and senator eventually, but he made it to the state house in Pennsylvania first and convinced the state that it was worthwhile to invest in improving the Ohio River channel between Pittsburgh and Wheeling. And by the end of 1819, they had a clear channel. So when Wilkins went to the Pennsylvania State House, he was able to get a bill through, and this became the first known governmental funding of clearing the Ohio River channel. Funding wasn't renewed, but by then they had a pretty good channel, and it was pretty clear at that time that the government would probably play a role in the improvements along the Ohio henceforth. So the things you will find in the river that will cause you problems if you're boating, things called riffles and other kinds of snags. Now, riffles are shallows, and you'll see that there's turbulence in the area because the river's real low there, and there's rocks, and this will cause you to go ashore. Now, the snags are generally trees that have fallen into the river. There's two types of snags. The planter is a tree that is rooted to the bottom of the river. And the top of the tree is no longer visible in higher water, but it's within your draft, so it could put a hole in your hole and sink you. Now, Sawyer is one that's not really rooted to the bottom, but it's lodged into the bottom, and it'll go up and down with the tide. And if it's pointing downstream, you could just float over top of it. But if it's pointing at your hole when you're coming at it, then it too could put a hole in your hole. So by 1824, the federal government got involved. And the first Survey Act of 1824 provided a funding to survey the entire length of not only the Ohio, but the Mississippi River. So instead of the government trying to design a way to get rid of these snags, the commander of the Army Engineers advertised a $1,000 prize to the person who could design the best plan, machine, or instrument that would remove these snags in the river. And a Kentuckian named John Bruce from Vanceburg designed the winning boat, and it was a machine boat, but it depended heavily on physical labor to pull the snags out of the river. And it worked well enough. I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. But about a year later, Henry Shreve, and the man for whom Shreveport, Louisiana is named, he designed a better system, and this had a mechanical boom on it. So it didn't rely heavily on manpower, but more mechanical power. And they were very strong, and they could easily lift these snags out of the river. And Macomb's Uncle Sam's tooth puller, as it was known, traveled up and down the Mississippi clearing the snags there. But as you know, the falls of the Ohio kept the tooth puller from getting north of the river at Louisville. So you could clear the channel between Louisville and Cairo, but you couldn't go any further north than that at that time. So we needed to come up with a way to deepen the river channel. And there were a few things they could do, things like wing dams, and they were built close to the shore, and it directed the main flow of the water in the river into the main channel, and it dredged itself out. And the idea by 1842 is we needed a 30-inch deep channel at all times. And a lot of that was a wing dam, snag removal. But there was still the problem with the falls of the Ohio. And so a plan came into being to dig a canal around the falls. And the Kentucky legislature couldn't come up with the funding. They disagreed. So they allowed a charter for the Portland Canal Company to dig this and maintain it. And they charged a toll for anybody who wanted to pass through. And you can see that channel still there today. But of course, it was mismanaged. It was behind. The tolls weren't sufficient. So they got a bailout from the federal government and another one. And finally, the federal government just bought all the stock in the Portland company and took charge of it in 1874. And from that point forward, there was no tolls to go through the canal, and it's still that way today. All right. Bear with me, we're going backwards. Okay. With the bigger and bigger steamships coming up and down the waterways, we needed to deepen the channel even further. 30 inches wasn't deep enough. So by 1878, the goal was to deepen the Ohio River to 6 feet. And that meant even during times of summertime when there wasn't much flow in the river. So the Army engineers adopted a French design known as the Chanoine. And the first one of these wicket dams was built at Davis Island, just south of Pittsburgh. And we'll get into the design of these here very shortly. All right, this one is the actual model of Lock 38. And this shows all the parts of the wicket dam. And once Davis Island was complete, the Pittsburgh had a full-time harbor. So they had water deep enough for ship travel at all times of the year at Pittsburgh. So it was very successful. If you look here, you'll see the wickets, and we'll see a video of one of these working here at the end of the presentation. But it took a boat called the maneuver boat and men on it. They traveled in front of these wickets, which would sit on the bottom of the river, these wooden wickets. And when you needed to raise the pool behind the dam, this boat traveled in front of the wickets, and they actually used wooden poles to get a hold of these wickets, pull them up off the river bottom, and put them into place. You'll see there's a bear trap in the middle, and that's just one large wicket, really. That would raise and lower as needed. Then the permanent weir, that created a pool at all times behind it. And if you look on the other side, there's a lock. And the lock would fill up when a ship needed to come in, if it was coming downriver. And then the other gate would open, and the boat would sink down to the level below the dam, because the river actually drops a few hundred feet between Pittsburgh and Cairo. And this made it so you could go between each one of the dams, each one of the locks, and drop levels or raise up levels as needed. So around our area, the wicket dams didn't come into Cincinnati until around 1902, when the first designs started taking place. And Fernbank, Ohio, right across from Taylorsport in Boone County, they chose that spot to build the first one of the wicket dams in Cincinnati. And there's a place there, it had a riffle, so there was a shallow spot on the Ohio side. That's known as Cullum's Riffle. And so they built the lock on the Ohio side. And so you'll see that to this day at Fernbank Park, the lockmaster's house and the power station is still in place today. So this shows all of the locks and dams that were around our area. And I don't believe I found any remnants of Lock 33 in Maysville. That was sold years ago when the Meldal and Markland came in. But there's remnants of all the rest of these still around. Shiloh has a park built around it. New Richmond, Ohio, Lock 35, that's Thomas More University owns that and runs a biological research station out of the lockmaster's house. Coney Island. Now before that, there was a small dam at Coney Island that allowed a pool for the Coney Island steamboat fleet. But after the building of the Wicket Dam there, they didn't have any problem from then on in until, as we'll find out, there were times where they needed to repair the dams, so they had to let all the water out of the pool. But on the Campbell County side, currently those houses are for sale if you're interested in buying a lockmaster's house. Fernbank, we've discussed. Mackville, those are now apartment buildings. And Markland, it's still over on the Indiana side there. But as you see, it took many years to get these locks and dams built to get our pool up to 6-foot level. So by 1925, all of our dams in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky were in place. Well, I wanted to know why the Licking River doesn't have locks and dams on it. And well, believe it or not, the government looked into doing it at one time. The Commonwealth of Kentucky actually took up surveys in 1836. They found a place where they would build a lock, and that was at the 3 Mile Riffle, which is right around Wilder today. There's not any remnants of what they started. They did start building the lock, but never finished it. In 1842, they gave up on it. But folks still persisted. And some folks in Pendleton County petitioned the Army to improve the waterway between Falmouth and Newport. But the federal government sent surveys in there, and they didn't consider it a good investment of money at that time. But they did improve the mouth of the river and deepened its channel. And as you can see, there are some barges that do come in and out of the Licking, but only about 3 miles south is navigable. As you can see, there's a steamboat sitting in a cornfield. Now this happens during times of floods. Now the dams can't control flooding. If the water comes, it's going to come. And this one, the steamer Virginia, this was actually in West Virginia, but this is an example of what can happen. The flood comes along, picks the boat up and puts it down somewhere around the river. And they would have to wait for the next one to come along to pick this thing back up and put it in the river again. But what ended up happening when the dam needed repair, there's an instance where the Coney Island fleet got stranded because the Fernbank Dam needed some wicket repairs and they had to drain the water out. And it took too long, and it was in the summertime, it took too long to fill up the pool between Mackville and Coney Island. So the boats sat on the bottom of the river until the pool built back up again. In the 1930s, again, we needed to deepen the channel. The boats got bigger and bigger. The barge traffic increased. The 6 feet was insufficient for a channel. So new designs come out, and this was called the High Lift Dam. By 1936, the Davis Island Wicket Dam had been in place for many years since it went into service in 1876. It was failing by then. So this was a new design where, if you look at this picture, you'll see that between each of those upright posts is a gate that will lift straight up. And then the pool behind the dam will build up. And so this one was concrete and steel. So the plan was to remove all the wicket dams in time. So by 1953, the Army Corps of Engineers had an idea to replace all of the wicket dams all the way down. So by then they started looking at our area, since the dams were replaced all the way from Pittsburgh to north of our area. And so this one is Markland, and they came up with a new design by then. The high lift was a bit inefficient. And Markland was the first one in our area to use a thing called a tainter gate. The tainter gate is about a quarter of a cylinder, and it uses the water behind it to actually use as a force to lift it into place. So if you go to Markland or Meldal, you can watch the tainters lift and drop as needed. And that's another picture of it. If you look in the center, that the cylindrical gate, that lifts and falls as needed. So this one's Markland. The first one to go into service here was Meldal. Meldal, they started building Meldal Dam in 1958. And the dam portion was finished in 62, and the lock opened in 1964. And this is the Weir side, and the lock side's over on the Ohio side. But funding and other problems, the wicket dams actually stayed in service on the Ohio River until 2018. So the wooden wicket dams lasted much longer than anybody ever thought possible. And they kept repairing it. Number 52 and 53 stayed in service between 1928 and 2018. And Olmsted was the last of the Tainter Gate dams, and that went into service in 2018. And these are the remnants of the lock houses, and this one is in Silver Grove. It's on Lois Lane, right off of where Industrial and Route 8 meet. There's a little private drive, and if you go back there, you'll see the lockmaster's quarters. The building on the left next to the water tower is actually the power station. Inside of that power station was an air compressing plant, and the air would be pumped from there by pipe over, and it lifted and dropped the bear trap. And then the lockmaster lived in the house in the middle, and there was another crew that would be seasonal that would live over in the house on the right. And they would have the maneuver boat dock back there, and they would raise and lower the wickets as needed. And the lockmaster locked ship travel in and out of the lock. This is Fernbank, and that's the lockmaster's house. And to the right of that is the compressor house. These are well preserved. The compressor house is now a venue you can rent for parties or meetings or something. It's very nicely preserved. And this is Mackville. If you're like me, I ride motorcycle a lot, and I've been passing these houses for years, and I always wondered what these things did. I'd heard all kinds of rumors that it was a women's prison or some other thing, but no, that was the lockmaster's house and the other associated buildings, and they still stand to this day, but they're private residences. Okay. This is the lock and dam in operation, and a man named James Stutzman, and his dad was the lockmaster there at Mackville. And they took some home movies of the operation, and it's very well preserved. And this will show you better than I can tell you how these things operate.
Or the Allied Ashland. This is a view of raising the wickets. The river has fallen where it is necessary to put the dam up. A wicket is approximately 3 feet wide and 14 feet Each wicket has to be caught, pulled up, set, and then flipped into position, like that one there. That is the steamer Monongahela being towed back to Pittsburgh after making its last trip. It was one of the last steamboats. This is the Arco. Coal tow down the river. This is one of J.T. Hatfield's coal tows going down the river. That is the E.D. Kenton. These were taken in front of our house. This is one of Mississippi Valley's steam prop towboats. There was 3 of these built, Ohio, Indiana, and Louisiana. This is the Herbert E. Jones from the front of the house. This is a panoramic view of Lock 37 with the dam down. Kentucky shore. This is the steamer Sprague. It was taken to Pittsburgh for the bicentennial and now being returned to Vicksburg, where it was a museum, but since it has burned and is no longer in existence. This is a view in the pilot house. That is Jacksburg waiting for my father. This is the Delta Queen on one of its excursion trips when the water was high. At this time it was owned by Green Line Company. This is a picture looking across the river to where they're cleaning out one of the bear traps. The bear traps fill up with mud over a period of time and have to be cleaned out periodically. Otherwise, they will not go all the way down. They cut a hole in the lower leaf, put a suction hose in there, and then pump out the mud with a steam pump. A diver goes down with a jet hose and works the mud loose and over to the pump. As you can see, it is a dirty gray stinking mud after laying underneath the trap for a number of years. That's Mark Naylor tending the diver, who is now coming up. He can only stay down a short time, as is quite tiresome with the hose down underneath the trap and fighting the powerful hose. This is cleaning off the esplanade as the water goes down. They have this tractor and run around and keep the water stirred up so the mud will not settle as much as bad. After the water goes down so far, then they have to take esplanade. if it dries, it's hard to come up. Here they're taking out the bulkheads in front of the gates, which is supposed to keep out some of the mud from going back into the recess where the gates are left during high water. There were 2 of these put in at the front of the recess. These also have to be hosed off as they are quite muddy. These men are lowering back the maneuvering boats, which is lowering the wickets. The wickets are lowered by pulling them back a short distance to take them out of the catch that they are held up in. A wicket consists of a prop and a horse. There is a concrete sill which is all the way across the river. Each wicket has their own slide which the prop slides in. To raise a wicket is pulled back until it goes into a catch which holds it up. It's a whole lot easier to lower the dam than it is to put it up. All they have to do is pull it back, let it go, and the current will take it down and it will lay on the bottom of the river. This is looking at the bear traps. There goes another one down. This is the steam dredge boat St. Genevieve, which also has been decommissioned since these movies were taken. It is a suction dredge. It has a cutter head in front which swings back and forth, cutting the mud up, which goes back into a large pump which pulls it out of the river and puts it across through that pipeline on the other side of the river. This is done whenever silt forms in the channel. There you can see it being pumped on the Kentucky shore. This is getting close to the dredge. There's a closer up look of the pipeline from the dredge to the shore. The Genevieve is now through and is proceeding up the river with its pipe to the next low spot, high spot in the river, which will have to be cut away. Panoramic view of the Kentucky shore.
Okay, very good that they were able to preserve that video. So that shows you how much labor that each one of these locks and dams required. That there would have to be boats and men to go out and to lower it, like you said, is easier because the river simply pushed the wicket down to the bottom of the river. But you can imagine the accumulation on top of those wickets over the winter. There would be a lot of mud and it would be really hard, and they had to grab a hold of that thing and put it on that boom and raise the wicket up and get it into place each year. And like I said, the bear trap too had a lot of things built up on it, and that diver had to go down and clear out underneath that bear trap before they could drop it. You see, in the winter when the river's up, they drop the wickets and you wouldn't have to lock through. If the river was high enough, you just simply passed the lock. You didn't have to lock through it. But in the summertime, when they had to build up the pool, then you had to go through the lock. Okay, I'm going to open it up for any questions that people have.
Yeah, there are some questions, and let me make sure there's no repetition. So let me ask the questions. First off, I have one myself. The mud that was being pumped out of the bed of the river, he said it was being pumped onto the Kentucky shore. I mean, it was just pumped onto the shore, not taken away, just built up on the shore.
They could do that, or a lot of times if it was downstream, it could go along with the river. But you didn't want it building up, especially not around the lock. You had to keep that lock good and deep and dredge. They even had some dredging equipment going through there. But you could pump it onto the shore if it was around the bear trap, which was close to the abutment, and that would have been on the Ohio side, that you would simply pump it onto the shoreline and get it out of the bear trap and the wickets area.
Okay, question from Richard and Cherry. How is the water level of the Ohio River managed today? What's the depth of the river today?
If you look, I think the idea was to keep it around 25 feet. It rarely is. At Meldal, and I do a lot of fishing at Meldal, it's normally in the summertime, it's the lowest I've ever seen. It's about 12 feet, 15 feet. And in the summer, when there's not a lot of flow, that's normal. But for that pool between Meldal and Markland, but as you know, it's different depths in different places. So normally what you see in Cincinnati is about, what, 20 feet or so. And that's normally all the lower they let it get.
Okay, Jeff asks, how did the locks and dams fare during the 37 flood? And he says it was around then that his grandfather worked as a diver doing welding on some locks.
Right. Well, you saw the water level, the entire dam's underwater. Because it's only a few feet. Those wickets only came up about another foot in the summertime to hold that pool. And they could leave the wickets in place, and if they needed to adjust it a little bit, they could work the bear trap. And as I said, that worked on compressed air, and it could come up and down and micro adjust that pool as needed. But during the flood, that whole thing's underwater. All the wickets, bear traps, abutments, everything goes underwater.
Here's an interesting question, again from Richard and Cherry. Could Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, have become a larger town if the Ohio River level had been better regulated by a dam or locks?
The general store, I'm not sure when that was built, 1830s maybe? I don't recall, 1820s. We didn't have anything in our area until 1908. Now, if we could have regulated the water level for year-round travel, yeah, why not? It was a point on the river where there was trading done. I know a lot of stuff come ashore. And there was a very large bourbon distillery, as you know, in Petersburg at that time. That all of that traffic and goods travel depended on the river level, which in the summertime could be nearly nothing, and there wouldn't be much coming up and down the river. So yeah, probably we may have had a whole different northern Kentucky if we had our locks and dams in place earlier.
Hey, Joe, why don't you unmute everybody, so if anybody has a question that they haven't put into the chat, they can go ahead and raise it.
I sent out an invite to let everybody unmute themselves if they have anything.
Oh, okay. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. Five, four, three, two, one. Okay. Well, Travis, as I said, pardon. Somebody start to say something?
Yes. Are there any remains in Taylorsport that can be seen?
No, that it's private property. I went back in there because the river is much higher now than it was when that was in place. The only place I've seen any remains is at Fernbank, and that's across the other side, because they blew all that up. When Meldal and Markland went into place, before they raised the Tainer gates up to fill that pool deeper, they blew up the dams. So all the concrete stuff's gone, because that would have been in the navigable channel, that stuff you saw. So the only place I see it is at Fernbank. If you go to Fernbank Park and walk down, there's a ramp there, and there's some remains of that lock that you can see, but everything else was destroyed necessarily.
Okay, any other questions?
I have one.
Fine.
I'm curious, is there a good place for finding photographs of the locks and whatnot?
Yeah, if you go onto the Cincinnati Public Library site and also the Kenton County Library site, there are many, and many photos of the construction of Meldal and Markland. And there's several pictures of it. Fernbank's very well documented. There's a couple of websites. If you go to CincinnatiViews.com and Northern Kentucky Views, I've got some of these photos from them, and it's pretty well documented. The one that isn't is Coney Island. There's one photograph of the dam at and it's from, it looks like Fort Thomas, way up on a hill. It's the only known photograph, the only one I've ever found of the Coney Island dam.
Interesting.
Anybody else? Well, thanks everybody that attended. I hope you found it interesting, particularly that video, the home movie, is something that's pretty hard to find anymore, of those scenes. So we appreciate that, Travis, as part of your presentation. And thank you again, Travis, for presenting. Again, if you're not already a member, please join the Kenton County Historical Society, and have a good Saturday all. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Oh, that's from your membership, huh? Yeah, I got you.